Hello, everyone. Good afternoon to those of you who are joining us from Asia Pacific, and good morning to those of you who are joining us from Europe. And if we have anyone from the Americas, good night and thank you for staying up for this. We look forward to sharing today with you. Welcome, everyone, to an Anaplan webinar today. I'm very excited to be your host and moderator for this session. And I will introduce myself as well as my colleagues here in just a moment. Today, we're here really to talk about agile procurement planning, really a process in which we can drive process efficiencies and ultimately cost savings when it comes to the bottom line. So hopefully you're in the right place. If I could just kind of get into introducing some of the folks that are joining me today for the webinar, I will do that. If we can just go to the next slide. So first and foremost, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Bhavik Bashi. I am the Area Vice President for Anaplan Asia. Effectively, I lead our end-to-end business across the Asia region. So very excited to be here kind of speaking with all of you today. With me today, I have Philip Sipiniewski, who is a Master Anaplanner Solution Architect from one of Anaplan's Gold Partners, Sonam International. Hello, Philip.
Hello, everyone.
And I also, hey, and also I have with me Chris Meyer, Finance Manager, part of the Global Procurement Office from AB InBev or Anheuser-Busch InBev. Hey, Chris.
Hey, everyone. Pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Great to have you both with me. And before we jump into our discussion today, let me just level set for the audience the agenda we have planned for the next 55 minutes. So really just three pieces to the agenda today. First, we'll be talking to Chris as well as Philip about the AB InBev connected planning journey with a keen focus on procurement planning, obviously given Chris's role and the engagement that AB InBev has driven in conjunction with Sonam and with Anaplan. So we'll have a great discussion on that, probably the first half, roughly 30 minutes or so. And then we'll jump into a live demo, which is very exciting. So Philip, who's joined us, will be running a live demo of Agile Procurement Planning. So you will get to see the Anaplan product in action, very exciting. And at the end, we have reserved about 15 minutes for Q&A. Now, I will call out that while the Q&A will be at the end of the webinar, at any point during this webinar, you can ask questions by using the questions box that you should see in the GoToWebinar control panel, likely on the right of your screen. So as we're speaking, if something pops up and you want to ask a question, just type it, put it in the questions box, and we'll make sure we get to it when we get to the live Q&A. So without further ado, I will jump in to this conversation with Philip and with Chris. If we can kill the slides, and I'll have Chris and Philip join me for a virtual coffee chat. So hey guys, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today. We're thrilled to have you and look forward to kind of learning from each of you. I've given the quick introduction about your role, but maybe I can just ask a little bit more. First, maybe I'll start with Philip. Philip, if you could just introduce yourself, your role, your company, and a little bit more about what you are and what you do.
Yeah, thank you, Bhavik. Hello, everyone. My name is Philip Sipiniewski. As Bhavik already mentioned, I'm Master Anaplanner and Solution Architect working in Sonam International. Sonam is Anaplan Gold Partner and specialized really in Anaplan implementations. I'm working in the field of enterprise performance management in the last couple of years. At Sonam, we have a team of more than 30 certified consultants. We deployed more than 50 successful Anaplan implementation in the last years. And a lot of our experience lies in the procurement, working with many global companies in the field of procurement. So that will be the topic of our webinar and discussion today. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. And Chris, how about yourself? A little bit about yourself, again, your role, as well as perhaps about AB InBev.
Of course. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. So I'll kick it off maybe with ABI. So the name itself might not be as familiar to all of you, but we're basically the world's largest brewer. In terms of revenue, we make between 50, 55 billion on average on a year. You might be more familiar with our products if I list out the names. So Corona, Stella, Budweiser, a few of our flagship brands, which I'm sure all of you around the world are aware of. And to myself, our global procurement office sits in Zug, Switzerland, and I'm part of a 7-person strong finance team here. And we do the whole controlling, reporting, and also the whole planning for pretty much our procurement office here. And we also look after the entire spend for procurement as a whole. So thinking around 30 billion in spend there. And that's pretty much the summary for how I fit into the whole ABI picture here.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So you guys are kind of a small company then, I guess. 55 billion in revenue, 30 billion in spend. I mean, just tremendous numbers there. And can only imagine the scale with which you're operating your business to be driving those types of numbers. I'll kind of follow up with you, Chris. I know most of the audience is going to be very, very interested to hear a little bit more than I think what you just shared about us. Can you just tell us a little bit more about AB InBev, specifically around this your relationship with Anaplan and also the role that you've played in the connected planning journey that AB InBev has been on for the past many years?
For sure. I'll speak to the procurement connected planning journey, if I can. So I'd say the first real strides we made there was in 2016 with our champions tracking model, which was, is abbreviated to GCT. And it's effectively a model where we track all of our savings initiatives for the whole company. And it's definitely a big model in terms of size. In terms of complexity, we started building on more complex models, given CTRM, which started development and rollout 2017, 2018. CTRM being our commodity and risk management tracking tool. We'll get into more details, I think, later on in this discussion. But 2018, we started really seeing the benefits of moving to Anaplan. And we started rolling out more and more models. So SCFD came into the works, and we also have an LE tool, which we can discuss in more detail. But as to Philip from Sonum's pretty much been our partner throughout this journey, helping us really develop the best possible tools we can have to really enable our organization to get to where we want to be.
Yeah, and let me follow up on that about kind of getting to where you want to be. And if you can just take a step back and put yourself back in 2016, I think you mentioned, which was the start of the journey. I mean, what was the problem statement? I mean, how did this whole discussion begin about we have a problem, we need to solve it, and then obviously at some point Anaplan came into the picture, but tell us more about that.
I'll start on the high level and get into it with an example. So I think the word I would use is complexity. So as I mentioned, the size of ABI, right? And going back to 2016, we still had 9 zones. We're now down to 6 zones. Not that we've divested, but that we've consolidated. And if you take 9 zones are structured into business units, into specific countries, and each country has all of their units and their entities being breweries. Globally, we have 225 breweries. And if I come back to our scope of reporting at the very beginning, you start your reporting on the level of the brewery. So each brewery does their supply chain financial data. They consolidate that on a country level, on a BU level, into a zone level, and then everything ties into the global level. So I think in terms of complexity, by our sheer size and the amount of data we work with, a solution or an improvement or getting us into the future was definitely necessary. And I'll take the example that back in the day, everything was run in Excel. And our whole team, so our 7-person team, strong team here, had to upgrade all of our computers just to have better processing power to be able to operate with these files. So the sheer size of these files meant that in some instances, it could even take us 10 minutes just to open the file to get into it. And based on the complexity of the work we do, there's a lot of macros in these Excel files, or there were, and there's a lot of cell dependencies. And the most tedious thing I can remember is that if one cell reference would mess up, the whole file was pretty much messed up. And the amount of time you wasted trying to find the original source and track the dependencies of the different cells to find the issue at hand, the slow time it took for the Excel to refresh every time you ran a macro, it was just a lot of wasted time and resources until you could actually start doing your job. So I think that was kind of, I mean, taking CTRM as an example, the size we now have in Anaplan is over 100 gigabytes. And to have an equivalent amount of Excel files, it's not manageable, right? Given the sheer size and the dependencies. And then you can have everything. I'm getting into quite a bit of detail, but with Anaplan, you have everything in a consolidated source on a cloud, right? And when we had everything in Excel, because of the restrictions of size, not only in cell count, but also physically the size of the files, you couldn't have everything in a single source. So you always had to kind of go into different files, pull out specific data that you wanted to compare, put it into a new Excel file, but you couldn't bring all of it at the lowest level of granularity because these files were so big and tedious to work with. And once you start getting the human factor into play there, there's a lot of room for error and manual mistakes, right? And that's something I think to a large extent we're able to overcome now.
Yeah, that does not sound fun. I'm going to come back to those details because I actually, I love the details because the devil is always in the details, and that's usually where the pain, sits, especially, for someone like yourself, right, who's having to deliver a specific business outcome, and maybe you're feeling frustrated by the technology environment and some of the process environment that you're dealing with. But if I take one step back, what would you characterize as, the implication of that from a business perspective? So obviously you're part of the Procurement Office, right? You have an objective, which I believe is really around bottom line cost savings, right? And all of this Excel madness, this reporting, this analysis was a means to, I think, identifying how and where you could optimize on cost, or where you saw opportunities or to take a different decision, perhaps. So if you could just comment, that was the pain, what was maybe the opportunity cost that you or AB InBev felt as an organization that says, as a result of this, this is what we're missing out on?
Yeah, so if I take ABI and our kind of philosophy, we're a very cost-conscious company, which probably a few of you are aware of. So in terms of resources, it's not that we're relatively lean in terms of resources, in terms of the scope that these individuals have. And if I take our value journey within my team, at least, you really have the core work, which is a lot of controlling and reporting, and then you have the analysis, and then you have the insights that you generate. And you can pretty much have a line of value added along that spectrum. And I think when we're still doing a lot in Excel, we're extremely engaged in the lower value added tasks. So the controlling, the reporting, and also fixing issues that we had. And we have a very strong team here, in my opinion, in Zug. And the ability for us to go to Anaplan freed up a significant amount of our time and really transform what our team was doing from this lower value added spectrum of reporting and controlling to really generating those insights to our leadership here in Zug, to the senior leadership, to the CEO and so forth in our monthly reporting, and our ability to really have a grasp of our costs and to really control them as well. And I think CTRM is a good example. Like I mentioned earlier, it's the most complex module, in my opinion, by far that we have. It's also the biggest one in terms of size. And effectively, to give you a bit of a background as to what we do in CTRM. So it's a tool that we use to track our total commodity spend and also all of our FX exposures. And what we have in there is, so you have the current year, so 2021, comparison versus last year, and also a comparison versus next year. And the budgeting process, which also ties into our one-year plan model, which we'll see later on, I think, is a major part. So our year-over-year impact for next year. And in terms of the visibility and analysis that we're able to give in CTRM, it's been magnificent, right? Also in terms of the further improvements that we've been able to do in CTRM itself, we've now created a simulator, which allows us, we have all these different price curves. So aluminium, for our future prices, we have the LME curve that sits in there, and each commodity has a respective price curve. And we have this simulator now, which enables us to do kind of a what if scenario. So what would happen if the LME price in Q4 were to increase by 10%? Or what would happen to to our exposure if BRL were to increase in Q4 by whatever, from 5.5 to or 5.3 to 5.4. And that kind of what if scenario is extremely powerful and something we weren't able to do prior in Excel. So to summarize what I've said, I think the time efficiency that we've managed to obtain, allowing our team to really move to the more value-added tasks that we deliver, and also the complexity and analysis that we're able to do in Anaplan has been two big wins for my team respectively, I would say, in summary.
Okay, yeah, no, thank you. That's extremely insightful. And the final one, I guess, for Chris, I want to go to Philip as well, is just, so what it sounds like what you're saying, because obviously, you know, procurement, you're looking at cost savings, and Anaplan's not free. So there must have been an analysis done when you were thinking about how do we become more efficient? How do we actually make better decisions and drive bottom line results while actually spending incrementally on a new technology or a software and procuring that, because, you know, the ROI or the business case of that is going to be net positive. And it sounds like that business case was really centered around some of these what if scenarios and basically better decisions that you could make, which would hopefully save you much more money than whatever you were spending on the subscription. If you can comment on the business case that you guys thought of when you thought of investing in the Anaplan platform.
So in terms of Anaplan not being free, I think we have a fantastic tech procurement team here. So I think they obviously did an amazing job in the contract that we have as well. I wasn't involved in that process, so from the negotiation or pricing perspective, I don't know that much of the details. What I can say, however, is by our sheer size. So if you take our 7-person team in GPO in global procurement, you have the equivalent role sitting in all of the zones, right? So we have our counterparts sitting in all of our 6 zones. They have their counterparts in the BUs. You have the whole category teams working in there as well. And in terms of doing a calculation on time saving, by the sheer amount of people who are involved in these processes, it's very possible to justify savings for your company, I would say. And as I said, almost our entire procurement routine is now centered in Anaplan, be that CTRM, be that SCFD, but also budgeting is a massive part in ABI. We almost spend more time doing planning the budget than the budget actually lives out, obviously exaggerating a bit. But with the one-year plan module and so forth, all of these with connected planning being intertwined and connected to each other, I think the sheer relevance within the organization is something someone doing a case to justify the cost should take into consideration, and how they're able to leverage it across the company. But to the specific cost analysis, I can't really say much more, to be honest.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. So Philip, I'm going to come to you now. You know, are a master Anaplanner, which for those who are on the webinar are not aware, that is the highest certification level that any Anaplan technologist can reach, right? So basically, Philip is an Anaplan wizard, and you're working for Sonam International, which is one of our gold partners. So, you know, somebody that we work with extensively on various different clients and customers. From a technology perspective, since, you know, you are the subject matter expert when it comes to Anaplan technology, can you talk about how and why you felt that the Anaplan technology was a really strong solution fit for the business problems and challenges that Chris just described, and how exactly, you know, that marriage made sense?
Yeah, good question. I think I will be just referring to a couple of points that Chris already mentioned to wrap it up. And I think I would start with the enterprise scale. You heard the numbers of Chris, the 30 billion spend, the complexity. And I think that's what Anaplan comes really strong. It can handle this enterprise scale really, really well. And also the real-time insights, as Chris explained. You have the simulator. So what if scenario, making the one input number, your whole model is recalculated, and you see the impact of, you know, a simulation immediately on your results. It's not like you need to push a button and you know, recalculate the whole model, go get a coffee, and then come back to check your results. So I think even on such a bigger scale, as Chris said, the model of tracking risk management is one of the biggest Anaplan model I've seen. and the performance is still very good. So very quickly the team can see all the insights. So I think this real-time insights speeds and the enterprise scale, so how Anaplan can handle complexity really well. I would also touch upon extensibility, because maybe Chris didn't go into this detail yet, but the model is also connected with other systems. So we can load, external data from the treasury system, and, in the whole connected planning. So it's not, Anaplan did not replace all the tools, but can also work very well with, other softwares that are out there in the ecosystem. And I think the last one that my personal favorite usually is that Anaplan is really business owned. So Chris and his team does not need, the 10 consultants sitting behind and logging IT tickets when there is an issue or there is a new request, but they can just go in Anaplan and they can learn it. They learn it very quickly, and they can just make a change. They can see what's behind or add new report. So I think this is a very also strong part.
Thank you for that. I think that last point you make about being business owned is very interesting, because it's not generally how people think about certain software applications. And maybe I'll shift to Chris for this question. Can you share your experience about the actual implementation journey? So once Anaplan was selected as a tool of choice, and your business processes were identified that these will be the first use cases or solutions to be built on the Anaplan platform, just talk a little bit about your implementation journey as a business owner for this.
Yeah, so as I mentioned in the beginning, Sonam's always been our partner as far as I can remember back in terms of implementing new tools. And I think I'd separate the process out into the whole implementation, and then when you're up and running, operating the model itself. And the whole development stage, I'd say we were very, very happy with what Sonam delivered. And I think the models, it's not an area you want to save in the development, because the better a job you do during the development and getting the model up to the stage that it starts running by itself, the more you save in the long term in terms of maintaining the models and the ease it is for you to maintain the model going forward. The way we manage our models here in GPO, so myself and a counterpart have done quite a few of Anaplan trainings. We went through all of the online learnings that we have, and we kind of just built the knowledge through online trainings and also being in the tool and learning for ourselves. And I'd say a lot of it we're able to do ourselves. We also have the back office support sitting in Bangalore, which takes a bit more of the administrative tasks. So is that granting access to users, changes to lists, and so forth. And the point I wanted to make there is the better you do in the setting up and the development of the tool, the easier it's going to be to operate it once it's up and running. And it also kind of obviously depends on the complexity of the tool, but Anaplan's really what you make of it in the end. So the amount you put into it, you get out of. So Anaplan, it's a very powerful tool, but you have to put it in to get back as well, is my personal experience.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And Philip, you're involved in many implementations above and beyond even AB InBev, although I know you've been involved in almost all of those as well. Any insights or best practices to share about, how a customer or potential customer that may be thinking about Anaplan right now should think about both purchasing Anaplan and then thinking about implementing and deploying Anaplan as a solution?
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe I will refer a bit also to our journey with ABI, because we started quite small. We started with one use case back in the days, I think in finance in Europe. And I think by starting usually small, not making, big project, big model, big problems, and starting small in Anaplan can also help you with that, with the modular approach. You can start with one use case, you can add new functionalities, you can add, another model. Since Anaplan is a platform, it's not that you buy, a supplier collaboration tool. It's not that you buy a hedging tool. It's really on the platform you can develop different use cases. And I think with AB InBev, we also started small. We worked with very agile and focused teams. And I think what makes the implementation successful is very partnership. And I think the cooperation of our team, of the consultants, knowing the tool very well, that's so we can advise the customer, and having the business experience, but also working very closely with the business. So we really cooperated close with the business. We identified the sponsors within the company. Our team is also very international, hence the name, Sonom International. We have almost 20 nationalities within our team and speak 19 languages. So we are also, able to deploy the models of AB InBev in South America, in China, in Australia, all around the Europe, which also had consultants speaking the local languages. And we reacted fast and started the journey very small, and now it's all over the world with AB InBev, with more than 3,000 users. So I think the understanding of a tool, good partnership, working closely with the business, listening to their needs, because that's why we implement the tool for them. So as Chris mentioned, the design part, the implementation can make it, very successful for the future.
Yeah, I could think of at least 10 more, interesting questions and points that I'd love to discuss with both of you. But given where I see the clock is on time, I know for a fact that our audience on the webinar will be curious, at least now, to see what it is that we're talking about in terms of Anaplan, especially for procurement. So I'd love to, seeing is believing, and Philip, maybe at this point it's appropriate to pass to you so that you can actually talk more, as you said, about what those different use cases on the Anaplan platform are, and maybe even demo what Anaplan looks like. As I pass to you, I just want to remind the audience, please do feel free to post or ask any questions in the GoToWebinar control panel. So as you post those, we'll be able to come back to those at the end for Q&A. So Philip, over to you.
Perfect. Yeah, I will actually start with, before going into Anaplan, I will start with two slides. But I also wanted to highlight a bit of the honeycomb of AB InBev. So as I mentioned already, Anaplan is a platform in which different use cases can be developed. And of course, our today's topic is mostly procurement, but I also wanted to show you a bit of the whole journey of AB InBev. So you can see that on a single platform, on a collaborative platform, we can combine the use cases of the sales department, the human resources, when we did a very big implementation for the global people model, the workforce planning model, on a very, very detailed level per employee, but also global bonus model. We do quite a lot in procurement, of course, that is the focus of our webinar today that Chris already mentioned, but I will zoom into procurement on the next slide. Of course, the procurement works very closely with the supply chain. So we have material resource planning, we have the variance model, and we have transport model in the supply. And of course, we have finance, CapEx, OpEx, consolidated P&Ls, service fees, and that's all in Anaplan. And I think also the strength of it is that all these different functions can collaborate on one platform. Having the data available that can be easily connected between the different models also enables the team to plan quicker and faster and make better decisions. But let's zoom into the procurement.
Can I add a point on there, Philip, if you don't mind?
Yeah, please, Chris.
Just to give an example when we're on this slide, and it really ties to connected planning, as the term suggests, and as Philip just mentioned. So procurement and procurement finance that we do is very closely linked to also treasury, also finance, and the whole department to supply, so the supply chain there. And one example is CTRM, so our commodity tracking risk management, has a direct link to the consolidated P&L model in finance. So at the click of a button, they can directly pull all the commodity information that they need. Vice versa, we pull exchange rates out of their model into ours. So there's kind of an example how this connected planning actually takes shape.
Great, thanks for adding that, Chris. That's indeed really good example. But let's have a look at zoom at the procurement, so we can see a bit more use cases. So CTRM, the commodity and risk management tracker that Chris was already referring a few times, the service fee that was shown on the previous slide. We also have recycled content model for the sustainability, in which suppliers give the percentage of the recycled content in their products, so the team can also track that in Anaplan. We have the weighted average payment term model, we have the savings tracking tool and CAPEX model. And I think what's also very powerful is that Anaplan enabled the procurement team, the Chris's team, to also work much better with other functions that the procurement team needs to collaborate with. You can see the SCFD model, supply chain financial data, which also tracks the performance of the supply and the procurement teams. And so also indirectly, of course, there are people costs and there are close cooperations with financials, and that Chris was also mentioning. So I think, yeah, this is the connected procurement, but also it goes much beyond. So it enables AB InBev and other organizations to improve the collaboration and their planning. Okay, I'll go now to Anaplan. I opened already the Anaplan model. I'm in the landing page of demo model. So of course, this is just an example of how Anaplan could look like. We already talked a bit about the implementation. During the implementation phase, we really design the model and craft, all the requirements to the needs of the customer. So it's really custom made and supports the exact planning process of each customer. But I brought one simple example of how a small procurement operations planning could look like, and also touch upon a couple of different Anaplan features like optimizer, for example. So we can see that we have few different steps of the model. Started with a procurement planning, where we can bring some external data like FX rates and inflation. Like Chris mentioned, it can be also a connection with other Anaplan models. So usually it's a central data hub where all the data is maintained and where all other functions and departments can use it on their platform. We have some contract governance and calculation. We have some information about the prices of the materials that were negotiated by buyers. We have a demand plan. It's a simple approval flow. So as a base for our procurement planning, from our SNOP model, in this case, we are loading the volumes. We have the contract allocation part, in which we can review the prices per contract of each material. We can run the allocation. I will show that in a minute. And of course, we can see the spend immediately after the contracts are allocated to the demand. But we can also go beyond that. We can have a contracts operations team working also on the same tool, where we can, maintain the information by contracts, by supplier, but we can also rate our suppliers on different KPIs. We can even, generate the PO or prepare the data that will be loaded also, because the extensibility that I mentioned before will be loaded to other tools where the PO, for example, could be generated, or other tools can make also use of the result of the calculation and the planning process of Anaplan. And we'll finish that with a simple reporting. We have spend analysis on quite detailed level, and we'll have a look at the FX exposure. Okay, so let me start with a demand plan. The first procurement plan is just getting the external data and information that can be maintained and submitted to the model. I wanted to show, now we've asked Chris something that Chris was referring to. So in Anaplan, with a push of button, we can pull the data from SNOP model. I've done it already. You can see the multidimensionality of Anaplan. I can see the data from different countries on different factories and breweries in this level. And I also can plan on different scenarios. I could see my actuals. I can see my budget data. I could also, plan for my forecast, or I could also create different what-if scenarios, something that Chris was referring to. So I can review my volume per month in this case. I can see it on the chart also based on the selection, and I can see a small workflow, to get approval. So in this case, we have planner, we have the manager, and of course we have buyer who sees the data of their category and can approve or reject the specific combination based on the submission. So you can see that in this case for Netherlands, I have 6 lines still not submitted. I have 6 already submitted. 2 of them were approved by my manager. 2 of them were rejected. I can see that 2 of them indeed were rejected by my manager. My manager can also input the comments direct in Anaplan, so we can communicate, but they could also just send an email from Anaplan, a notification for me to check the data. So if I go also to the other side, let's say go to the buyer on the other hand does not submit the data per brewery per country, but the buyers are responsible for different categories. So I can review my category 1. In this case, I can see all my data that is relevant for my category, and I can also approve or reject. You see that in my case for category 1, only 3 were submitted and I approved, and 1 was rejected in this case. And I can also see all the previous comments of planner, of manager, and the status of this submission. So that's an example of a simple workflow, and also how people can collaborate and communicate within Anaplan. Okay, let me go to the contract allocation part. Before I run the optimizer to allocate my contracts to this demand, I can also review the pricing. So you can see that I have different raw materials and I have different contracts, and on this matrix I can review. If I go to I select a different material, I see, okay, which supplier offers me the best price, which contract, and I can also compare this price based on the different contracts. So that will be one of my constraints to optimize and use the Anaplan optimizer for the allocation. And the second constraint in this example is a maximum allowance that we have negotiated per contract. So based on these 2 simple constraints, now I can see all the lines with my demand. So each raw material that is requested by the factory, in this case in Brussels, I can see local currencies, I can see unit of measure, I can see the volumes, and all of the other columns are empty. And I will not go one by one and select from the drop down all these contracts, but I will leverage Anaplan optimizer, and that will just do the job for me. And of course, more constraints could be added. We could add transport costs. We could add, some routes that are some contracts that should not be allocated to the specific geographies. So that of course can be extended. That could be defined per different categories. So as I mentioned in the beginning, it's really designed for the process and for the needs of a specific customer. So I'll push this button to run the allocation. Of course, in this case, I have a single allocation, but I could also run allocation to the multiple contracts. So now the Anaplan will do this all few thousand lines allocation for me. And you can see that immediately all the cells were populated. So optimizer contract proposal, and based on these 2 simple constraints, Anaplan said, okay, this demand in Brussels will be satisfied by contract 7 from this supplier. And that was the contract allowance. I also can see the contract currencies because we have sourced the materials from different countries. And I can also see the price in euro. So after allocation, I could go and review my data on quite detailed level. Immediately, I see my spend, my base and budget spend. I see it also on a small waterfall. What's the impact of commodities? What's the non-commodity part? And again, I can see already all these lines after allocation with commodity spend. What's the commodity delta? What's the negotiation delta? What's the impact of inflation in this case? So that's quite on the highest level. But yeah, as we talked a bit already before, Anaplan can also handle complexity well and can also handle all the calculations on a very detailed level. Let me open this grid quickly and go to the contract details. I will select 1 line. And you can see I can compare also my data between budget and forecast in this case. I can see the volumes between 2 different versions. But here I can go to a very, very detailed level into different components of my contract. So I can see there are 2 different commodities used. I can see what are the prices, what's the commodity delta, what's the FX impact in this case, what's the transactional and translational impact. I can see, the impact of raw materials, of transport. So building up this contracts component in the procurement planning part, then we are able to also to report and analyze the results and data on a very, very detailed level. So that gives us a lot of insights and seek for the cost savings, for the improvements, and for the cooperation with our suppliers as well. So I will make that link, and let's go to see a bit about the supplier collaboration. So I can see the supplier scorecard. I can select all different suppliers here from the drop-down again. So I'm looking at the supplier one, see the overall score of the supplier and the supplier ranking. So it's my second favorite, second best supplier. If I go to a specific combination of a supplier and factory, I have a set of different KPIs that I can rate the cooperation with my supplier. So that could be, for example, requested data from each factory that enables buyer to see how the suppliers are doing on a global level. In this case, it's subjective. I can pick up the number, but of course, having the data in Anaplan, some of these KPIs could be also automated and just immediately calculated, like on-time delivery, full delivery, quality of documentation. So based on these different scores, I can see immediately the results and how different suppliers cooperate with different factories, what's the spend, how they make on, the procurement, the delivery in this case, quite high rated, the support, but not so high on the innovation. So also, again, collaborating, gathering this data from the country levels, from even each factory, I can have a better view on the cooperation of my supplier and make a better decisions. Okay, which is the supplier that I would like to do the business with, and maybe which is the supplier that is causing the problems. It's not delivering on time. The quality is quite low. And I will finish that up with example of two reports. I will have a look first at spend analysis. You can see that I'm immediately getting the set of different KPIs. I have the waterfall chart, which is, again, I can analyze on different dimensions. Let me change that to friends. And you can see that, everything is updated automatically. All the calculations are on different dimensions. And you can analyze, immediately with this waterfall. I think many companies like waterfalls. How do I get from my base spend? What's the impact of commodities? The impact of inflation? I made a saving on negotiation. There's a small effect of transactional effects. And how do I get to my budget spend? And I could then just, continue and analyze it on different angles. Here I also brought, the contracts and material was the highest spend. So you can see that the highest spend is from material 9, but also contract 9. If I change the volume here to the spend, you can see that my charts are also updated. So then I could just go on with my analysis on this, interactive dashboards, bring different charts and analyze my data to get better insights and make better decisions. And I could also here do it with FX exposure. I have the map chart. I have what's the coverage. In this case, France, we have 100% coverage. You can see what's the FX exposure in Europe per country. I can also zoom in and zoom out, analyzing the data on a map chart. And I can also, on a very detailed level, see the exposure here per country, per category, and per currency. So having this interactive dashboards on the multi-dimensional level, Anaplan enable us also to have make a good analysis and analyze our data. The last dashboard that I wanted to show will be also spend by factory and supplier. So yet again, just a different angle. I can see the total spend, I can see the total volume. I select the different factory and analyze, the supplier spend per month in this case, and spend by supplier. So I think there's much more than this simple example, but we would like also to give everyone a time to ask some questions. So Bavik, back to you.
But thank you so much for that wonderful demo. I know we only had 15 minutes there, but I think you were able to give a nice overview of what an end-to-end solution could look like, even just in the procurement space. So thank you so much for taking the team through that. As Philip said, we are now at the last section of our agenda for today, which is really around Q&A. We have Philip with us, we have Chris with us. So please do feel free to now go ahead and ask your questions to either one of them or myself, I guess, in the questions box using the control panel. So let's see what we've got coming in. Okay, kind of a maybe more straightforward question, but it says, can suppliers also access Anaplan?
Yeah, I can answer this one. It's also an use case that we have been developing. I think especially in last year, we see that the popularity of this use case is increasing. So we can also give the access to the suppliers, and we can ask suppliers to input the data, the volume or contracting directly in Anaplan, instead of, collecting hundreds of Excel sheets from each and every supplier. So yes, definitely, suppliers can access Anaplan, suppliers can input their data directly in Anaplan, and the teams can immediately see all the inputs. That is what is happening in Anaplan as well.
Okay, fantastic. Next question is the solution only for CPG companies?
Yeah, I will also take this one. No, CPG companies, we see many use cases for CPG companies, but we can also go to many different companies. We also deploy this solution for pharma companies in a recent year, for manufacturing companies. So it's not limited to CPG companies, absolutely not.
Okay, take a look. How long does it take to prepare the model for planning cycle? I think it might be for Chris, but it could be for Philip as well. I'll let one of you comment.
Do you want me to go, Philip, or do you want to go?
Yeah, maybe you can start. You have some also experience with preparing the model.
For sure, and I think one point we didn't mention that much was each year. So you have a planning model, the one-year plan model, which you use for the budget for the subsequent year. And each time you go into a new cycle, you have the whole rollover process. So it's changing all the information that is currently in there with the dashboards and so forth, your time dimensions to the new year. In the past, we've needed a bit of support from Sonim to get this done. Now we've managed to internalize it. Again, depends on how complex the model is. With Anaplan, with CTRM, it takes a bit longer. I'd say, just to give you a rough guidance, I'd say a fully dedicated single resource would take a week on CTRM for the rollover because it's the most complex one. But if you take GCT or perhaps the one-year plan model, it's much more simple. And again, it takes longer the first time you do it, and afterwards you become much more fluid with the rollover process. But with the easier models, definitely a lot less time than that. And it's not something you need a complex super Anaplan user like Philip is. It's something that you can easily internalize into your company as well.
Yeah, I can also follow up on that. Of course, the easiest answer would be it depends. So of course, it depends on the complexity of the models that Chris refers to. But also, as I mentioned, I really like the fact that Anaplan is business owned. Also, during the implementation, we work closely with the business, and we also involve customers in building the model and setting up the model, like Chris and his colleagues. So, the knowledge immediately during already the implementation is within a team. So they know the model structure, they know how it was set up, and they can maintain that. And we also prepare, the documentation like admin dashboard. So as Chris mentioned, you don't need very, big Anaplan knowledge, because we like to guide users on the dashboard. Okay, this is what are the steps that you need to prepare for the planning of the next cycle. Okay, how to start a new scenario, how to load FX rates. So basically, you don't even need admin access in certain models, because you can all do it from the dashboard perspective.
Got it. Thanks. We have another question that came in. Do you have global assumptions in your model or for your model? I think that's for Chris.
I need some help understanding the question. What are we talking about in terms of global assumptions?
Yeah, it could be maybe FX rates, right? Or maybe inflation.
Yeah, so global assumptions in terms of what Philip just said. So we have different sources, and tying it back to CTRM, global assumptions in terms of price curves, we have a lot of different sources, be that Bloomberg, be that from Schneider and so forth. The link I mentioned to FP&A, so they're the ones with the, if you will, single source of truth in terms of FX rates, in terms of CPI rates, and with the models directly linked, it's very easy for us to tie back and forth. Do we have global assumptions in terms of FX and CPI? 100% is what we manage here in global procurement in terms of CTRM, SCFD, and so forth. One point which we didn't discuss is we have a global data hub. where we have a centralized source for all of our lists, all of our naming conventions, and so forth, and all of our models feed out of this global data hub. And the real benefit there is if you have the change, it's always happening in that centralized location, and you don't risk any mismatches in naming conventions across different modules which speak to one another. And I think that's another useful feature that we have.
Yeah. There's a tactical follow-up, Chris, which I think is related, but it just says, how often did you update your FX assumptions behind your model?
So in general, it depends. We have a lot of different FX assumptions. We track our transactional FX in terms of the FX rates used when we actually transact in the procurement process. And we also have translational rates because we have to translate everything back into USD for our reporting processes or reporting routine. And our routines in general are monthly routines. So CTRM is a monthly routine. It's done once a month, as is our SEFD. In terms of how often we would be able to do it, I mean, as frequently as you want. And Philip mentioned it quite often. It's a click of a button to import the rates. It's very quickly done. Our routines are more focused around a month or a monthly cycle. So in terms of our specific frequency, it's monthly, I would say.
Got it. Next question is, have you connected your procurement planning to other apps like S&OP or FP&A?
So other apps, so FP&A, do I understand it as other organizations with, well, other functions within ABI?
If you
Yeah, I think
financial models.
Or, okay, so I'm not sure if he means apps, the specific Anaplan apps. So in terms of using the specific Anaplan apps, GCT now uses the app feature, which has, I think, made great strides in terms of visibility, that it produces the visuals and so forth. And there, for us personally in procurement, it depends on the complexity of the model. So for GCT, let's say a bit less complex of a model, it makes sense, and it's the one you really want to get your visuals into. In CTRM and the ones linked to more FP&A, we still prefer to stay out of apps and focus more on the reporting side of things. But there, it's really us as finance people who are in the details, in the numbers, who strive on a bit more complexity and more features. But if you really want simplicity for external reporting, for people to look at reports, I think the app also adds a very nice feature to this specifically, yeah.
And I think part of the connectivity question in there as well about different Anaplan, the different use cases or different processes on Anaplan, can they be connected? And I think you mentioned that, you know, they are in many instances, right?
Exactly. So FP&A is directly connected to CTRM, vice versa. It pulls back and forth. And a good example of connectivity is the one-year plan. So the one-year plan, in terms of doing our budget, it depends on our champions or saving initiatives, which I talked about, which sit in GCT. You need to know your commodity and FX year-over-year impacts, which are in CTRM. And the two pull directly into the one-year plan model, right? So there's a direct link from GCT to give our numbers for our saving initiatives in terms of our budgeting process. That feeds directly into there. Commodity and FX escalations also directly feed into the one-year plan model. So we definitely have the direct links built up within our function, but also cross-functionally, I would say.
Yeah, got it. Okay, this one is a question similar, I think, to what I mentioned in our initial chat, but they've asked it, so I will ask it. How did you quantify in dollars the benefits of less process complexity to help justify procuring the Anaplan platform?
So again,
yeah,
so I can give one basic example in terms of, I had a Greenbelt project the other year, which kind of tied around the LE tool that we're rolling out, and we're rolling out in different zones as well. And the cost benefit analysis that we did there is, we took the efficiency gains, right? So how many people are currently operating in the process, and how long does this routine and process actually take that respective individual? And how does that process and routine change, and how are the efficiencies generated through going into this Anaplan model? So how much quicker are they? How much time do they save? And then you basically just take their compensation rate or their cost to the company and multiply it by the savings you have, and scale it across how many employees are actually in the system. So that's one cost analysis we kind of did to get there. But as I said, I think you'd say we haven't done it on a global scale yet. In terms of efficiencies, there's definitely efficiency gains there that we can quantify in a dollar amount as well. But also, it's not only the efficiency gains, but also the detailed analysis that we're now able to do. So I think it's two main benefits from us going into Anaplan.
Perfect. And I'm looking at time. This may or may not be our last question, but it's a good one. Is what's next for you at Anaplan?
The one for me? Is that for me?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's
okay.
for you, Chris. So it's kind of what's next with Anaplan now.
So one point I'd make is CTRM, again, as my go-to example. We built it in 2017, and it's not static. It keeps growing. So we added the simulation, the simulator in there. We're also putting a value at risk scenario analysis into it. So the modules are there, and once you start working with them, you start realizing what additional potential is there and what else you could do. Also, CTRM, treasury, our hedging policy, can we get an analysis on our T policy? Can we do more on our coverability and so forth? SCFD is our supply chain financial data. What we're working on this year is to really automate the inputs that go into it. So at the moment, the zones still have their manual Excel files that they load into SCFD, which then is analyzed and everything in Anaplan. But to really get an automation from SAP straight into Anaplan is kind of another efficiency project that we're working on to really get to ease and save time on the zone side as well in their monthly routine. And what else would I say? It's not just us in core procurement finance, if you will. There's also, as Philip showed on slide, the recycled content tracker that we have. And I think as it grows within procurement, it also expands, right? So sustainability starts seeing the advantages, and a lot of people are starting to reap the benefits of Anaplan or see the potential of it.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. And I'm conscious we're just at time, so I think it did end up being the last question. So thank you so much, Chris, for sharing your insights, and also for Philip, amazing demo, and also sharing your insights as well. Given that we are now at 4 o'clock in Singapore, we'll go ahead and conclude this webinar. And most of all, thank you everyone who attended the webinar, both for your attendance as well as your participation. Of course, if you are interested in learning more, we would be happy to talk to you about that. So hope you all have a great rest of your day and got some value out of this session. And talk soon. Stay safe.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.